In under 10 minutes, I'm going to show you how to stitch multiple images together. The result will give you a high resolution image, a shallower depth of field if you need it, and a wider angle of your landscape. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video where I share the best practices and tips to achieve the same results wherever you are in the environment you are photographing in. So I'm at Fairy Lake, and in Fairy Lake is a famous little bonsai tree called Fairy Tree. Fairy Tree is growing out of this log that's kind of sticking out at an angle out of the water. It's fairly calm right now. There's some fog in the background, and this is one of a few iconic spots here in Port Renfrew on Vancouver Island. Is this beautiful little bonsai tree. There's also Big Lonely Doug, which is the second largest Douglas fir. There's another, the single largest Douglas fir, and that's way up in the woods up this way. It's really hard to photograph because it's like tucked into a grove. But here is where I am going to photograph this bonsai tree. And it's January, so all of this brush can be in the foreground. This is beautiful red and rust color. There's some really nice reds right here. So that combined with kind of the dead grass, which is yellow, and the newer ferns, we got licorice ferns, and you got some green growth that's coming up here as well. Kind of give us a nice palette of colors. And it's calm right now, so I'm going to take some shots of the fairy tree with the kind of bleeding colors there, reflection of the rust and red colors, some orange, greens, that sort of thing down in there. So let's take a few shots. Something that's great about the Z9, even though it's a bit wonky, I've grown to love it for doing verticals. I can shoot it looking straight down. I can even tilt it to the side for verticals. So it seems a bit wonky, but it definitely works. And I really enjoy this screen. On my tripod, I've got a plate here that can self-level. Well, actually, I'm the leveler. But I can twist this knob and I can level this bottom plate. And the idea is that when I pivot on this ball head, and I got a couple of knobs here that'll help me to select a certain degree, or I can just move it freely, I can go ahead and shoot multiple images and then stitch them together to make a pano. If it's not level, as I twist and turn it, it'll either go up a hill or down a hill and move in degrees instead of giving me a nice true level shot from image to image. Now I could widen my shot just in case, shoot a wider image, still capturing multiple shots from side to side, and then stitch them together and then crop it in. So that I'm going to do a couple of things just to make sure I got the shot. But these leveling plates are great for that type of technique. Here is a walkthrough. I took pictures. Let's see. Here we go. One to the left, another one over to the left, further to the left. I'm working backwards. And then I moved up, and then I moved all the way over to the right. See, I'm going past the fairy tree there, still to the right, down, back over towards the fairy tree. Basically in a grid form. So I'm going to cross, up, over in a grid. So I'm taking pictures of this whole area. That's including the base of those trees, because it's like an evergreen. There's some that have some lichen on the top there. And this whole area I'm going to try and encompass into one image. Alright, so I'm in Lightroom. I uploaded everything. I've got plenty of images of the fairy tree, some shots to the left and the right, the background and the foreground. And what we're going to do is start off with just 4 images, one to the far left of the fairy tree all the way over to the right, and we're going to stitch these together. I've overlapped these images by about 50%. I think 30% would be your minimum of overlap that you want to do. And I'm also shooting at a very shallow depth of field. I think it's 2.8, and I'm zoomed in, which will blur out any of the foreground branches and shrubs that I have. Now, once your 4 images are selected, you go to Photo Merge and then select Panorama. Again, this is in Lightroom. This will go ahead and stitch all the images together. And as you can see, my camera was on a little bit of a slope, so I didn't adjust my leveling plate good enough. But it gave me some options here to go ahead and fix it. I can slide up the boundary warp, which twisted it and corrected some of those issues. Or I can unselect that and just click Fill Edges. And this basically does like clone stamping or a spot removal technique where it takes the pixels from around the surrounding area and fills in those blank gaps. Now I sped up the process of editing and I came away with 2 images. One where I show some of the red bleeding in from the reflection of the shrubs in the background, and one with it removed. Let me know in the comments which one you prefer over the other. So that was a merge with 4 images. Now I'm going to do it with over a dozen images. Same process where I highlight all the images that I want to use, right click, merge into panorama, and the program in Lightroom just does its thing. If you notice 1 or 2 images is missing, like I have, I just needed to redo it and find those missing kind of tiles that I shot in the field. I do a basic edit in Lightroom, exposure, contrast, that sort of thing, and then move it over into Photoshop to do more fine detail work. And I also use some other programs like Topaz Labs to do a little bit of extra sharpening and denoise if it requires it. Now, I'm always curious what other photographers are using in post-production, so let me know in the comments what it is that you use.
Hello everyone, so I'm back out in the field and I wanted to show you some examples of some issues you might have if you were out photographing and stitching images together. One of them being the type of lens you're using. If you're using a wide angle or a fisheye, because there's going to be distortion on the sides, when you pan left to right to go ahead and take those photos, you'll see on the sides there quite a bit of distortion as you move left or right. And so if you don't have enough overlap, it might not stitch it all together. It might be super wonky. If you were to look at see the side here with the trees, you're gonna get a lot of pulling and distortion to the right and to the left. So another issue I wanna talk about is exposure. So when you're setting up for your multi-shot location, make sure to not change the exposure or even take a look at the clouds and the sun, because you'll take one photo to the left, and if it's underexposed and you want to stitch it to the next one that's overexposed, those 2 images are going to have a hard time stitching, and if they do stitch, you're going to see that exposure line between the 2 images. So another issue you might have is motion or movement within your scene. So this could be caused by wind. If you have a tree that's blowing in the wind and you took a photo of it, and then you're trying to stitch it with a second photo, and the tree is not moving nearly as much, and its branches are a different orientation, the program's going to have a hard time stitching that together. Now, if you're coming to a scene that there's no wind, but you have boats moving, well, those boats are going to be moving throughout your scene, which will cause a bit of an issue. But you're also going to have changes in the environment like wake and water, and that water, say if you're shooting in Venice, is going to disrupt other docks or something moving up and down. If you don't get everything in one shot, you could have docks moving and split, and you're going to have variations of artifacts showing up where the program's either trying to stitch it together or just harsh lines where it's broken apart from one image to the next. So some huge benefits for doing stitched images is one, a wider angle shot. So if you have a telephoto and you don't have a wide angle lens, maybe you want to get that all in one scene, so you go ahead and you take multiple shots and you stitch them together. The second thing is high resolution. Maybe you need a scene to be blown up to a billboard size, or you wanted to print something on a higher resolution. Well, you stitching multiple images together is going to boost up that resolution because you're going to get so much detail in one scene. So maybe that's something that you're looking for. The third thing is depth of field. So I showed it in the video where there was bushes in the foreground, and I could move my tripod to a different angle, but the fairy tree wasn't going to be in the shadows of the trees as much as I wanted it. And it also changes the angle of the fairy tree and that log out of the water. So I chose to shoot through the bushes, but using a telephoto allows for a shallower depth of field. And we control depth of field three different ways. One, if I get closer to a subject, I can create a shallower depth of field. Two, I can close down my aperture or open it up, and that controls depth of field. So the wider the aperture, the shallower the depth of field. And then three, if I use a telephoto and I zoom in, that also gives me a shallower depth of field. Wide angles, you're going to get so many things in focus. So shooting at a wide angle will get all of those branches in focus, as well as a tree, and it might be very distracting. Well, if you like this video, please give me that thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed, think about subscribing. If you're looking at stitching wildlife images together, something where a subject is actually moving throughout the scene, and you're shooting at 10, 20 frames per second, and you don't quite have that composition that you want from one frame throughout those multiple frames that you shot, well, I have a way around that I can show you how to stitch those together and get that one shot that turns out in the end. And it's a little bit more technical, but I'll pop that video up here, and I hope to see you in the next video. All right, cheers.